everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be going through my November wrap-up. So for anybody who has been hanging around for the last little while, I have been participating in a readathon called the Once Upon a Readathon, and that a lot of my November books were chosen to try to fit some of the prompts for that readathon. It was really fun. I had a great time. I was on the team Fairy Godmothers, and it was great participation from everybody and just like overall a really good time. I had a very fruitful reading month, which I find happens a lot when I'm participating in readathons because you want to finish things and earn points for your team. So it's a good motivator. And even though I didn't feel the best throughout the month of November, I still managed to get a fair bit of reading done. I would say of the entire year, this is the reading month that had like the biggest split because I did read a couple of romance novels this month. I was feeling really dragged out and tired, if we're going to be honest, and everybody in my family was also really dragged out and tired. So I needed to have some reads that were a little bit like fluffy and light with an emotional payoff. And so I was really in the mood for some romance. So at the end of the month, you'll see that I fell back on reading some romance and it was really nice. It was a good change of pace, but some great fantasy reads in November as well, including a book that is definitely going to make my list of favorites for the year. So we will get started. I read 9 books in November. One of them I listened to on audio, and I had 1 5-star read, 1 4.5-star read, 1, 2, 3, 4 4-stars, 1 3.5-star, 1 3-star, and 1 2-star. So definitely a bigger spread of star ratings than is typical, but I did read outside of my usual genre as well, so I suppose that could be expected. I will go through them just in the order that I've written them in here. And the very first one was the selection for the Discord's read of the month, and that was The Justice of Kings. So this is a 2022 fantasy release and one that Alan over at the Library of Alexandria really pumped up. He was super excited when he read it. And I'm thinking, excuse me, because this was, I believe it was a February release, but I think he may have even read it last year. I think he had an arc potentially and read that and just was raving about it before it came out. And I had actually wanted to pick it up at the beginning of the year, but just, you know how it goes. TBRs, extra books being added in. This was finally the month that it got picked for the group buddy read, and I was super excited about that. If you haven't heard about this one, it is the first in, I believe, what is going to be a trilogy, and it centers around a king's justice whose name is Conrad von Wald, but it's told from the point of view of his, we'll call her his apprentice or like his assistant. Her name is Helena, and she is a young woman who is traveling with him and trying to determine if she wants to follow in his footsteps because he has given her the opportunity to learn from him and then potentially choose this as a career path. Or she's trying to decide if she wants to go off and kind of make her way in the world in, a different way. But it's told from her point of view. So even though Von Wald is ostensibly the main character of the saga, we are seeing or like looking in on him from another character's perspective, which is really interesting. And what I also like is that this story is being told retrospectively. So we have Helena at some undetermined point in the future. We don't know how far in the future this is, but we have Helena who's looking back and telling the story of Von Wald and how his personal story relates to some shifts and changes that are taking place in the wider kingdom. So he and his company, like their company of friends, they travel around the kingdom searching for towns or cities or people who need their help meting out the king's justice, basically. So in this story, they find themselves embroiled in a murder plot. And this murder plot actually ends up having far-reaching consequences and is tied in to some of the bigger political shifts that are happening in the kingdom. But this is very well paced. It is very quick to get through. Everyone who read it on the Discord server made it their way through very quickly. The prose is really easily digestible. The characters are interesting. And I think that the narrative device gives you a unique perspective into Von Wald. And I really like stories that are told in that way. This was a great first entry. I gave it a 4 stars. It was not a perfect book to me, but I thought that it was super compelling, interesting, and it has made the second book in the series one of my most anticipated releases of 2023. So very glad that I finally picked this one up. After that, I went on to read the first volume in Heaven Official's Blessing by MXTX. So I've talked about her other series, Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation and Scum Villain's Self-Saving System, on the channel before, and this is the final one of her series that I have not yet started, and volume 1 was excellent. There's actually season 1 of a donghua, or a Chinese animated show, that is released and is available on Netflix, and so I had already watched season 1 of that show. Actually, I watched that before I read any of her books, and I really enjoyed season 1 of the animated show. And it aligns well with the book. Like, it is a very good, I believe it's a very good translation of the show, very good adaptation. And it was a good refresher to read the book and see the characters and remind myself of what had happened in season 1. And it made me very excited to go on to the rest of her series and go on and read this. The basic setup of this one is that it does deal with cultivation magic, which is, the same over all of her series. But in this one, we are following a past prince who has ascended to godhood. And this is actually his third time ascending. So he has ascended twice in the past and then been banished from the heavens. So this is his third ascension. And he sets out to the human realm to try to earn himself some credits because he has a lot of debts to pay off. And he gets embroiled in a mystery surrounding the disappearance of people in a certain part of the world. And it's really interesting because we get a lot of hints at his backstory. We see him interact with some really interesting characters, and we begin to find out that his past might end up being a lot more complicated than we first think, and some of these characters may be tied to him in ways that he does not yet realize. So it was an excellent first book in a series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the rest of this one goes. After that, we had my 5-star book for the month, and that was Joe Abercrombie's Red Country. I'm not going to talk a lot about Red Country because I did a full spoiler-free review with a spoiler section at the end where I just did a little bit of character discussion. But to give you a very short summary, this was my favorite of Joe Abercrombie's standalones. It was his attempt at doing a Western-style story, and he succeeded in all ways, I believe. The characters were excellent, the plot was really fun, and it made me super excited to continue with the First Law series. I'm going to listen to the next book, which is the collection of short stories, in December, and I'm then going to go on and start the Age of Madness first thing in 2023. This was also my audiobook for the month, and it was phenomenal. The audiobook narrator of First Law is really popular, well beloved for a reason, and this was a fantastic audiobook. So very, very happy that I finally got to this one. And then after that, we have my next fantasy pick, which was The Lion of Macedon, or it's actually Lion of Macedon. And the terrible Goodreads algorithm, like, this is how bad the Goodreads website is. If you type in The Lion of Macedon, it doesn't give you any suggestions. This book doesn't even pop up, which blows my mind. But anyway, yes, Lion of Macedon by David Gemmell. This one also got 4 stars. Yes, so this got 4 stars. This is historical fantasy, and if you have been on the channel for a little while, you know that I just finished the Troy trilogy by Gemmell, which I loved. Fantastic trilogy. That was a retelling of the Trojan War, and I loved it so much. This one is focused on the character of Parmenion, who is one of Philip's generals, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is historical fantasy as opposed to the Troy trilogy, which I think is just historical fiction. And there's a sprinkling of what you could believe is the supernatural or you might not believe is the supernatural, but it really toes that line. This is full in on the fantasy. So this actively involves magic. There are prophecies, there are spells, there are witches, the whole shebang. So this is absolutely fantasy. And I really liked it. There was a stretch of time in the middle where I did feel like it dragged a little bit. So unlike the Troy trilogy, which I thought was paced brilliantly, I never wanted to put it down. I did feel like this one flagged a little bit. But I absolutely loved the ending. I thought it was totally epic. I usually end up enjoying David Gemmel's endings. They are that kind of classic heroic fantasy. You know there's going to be a big build-up and like a big power move at the end. And it absolutely was the case here for Line of Macedon. And I probably was thinking that it would sit at like a 3.5 stars for most of it, but that ending totally bumped it up to a 4. Now, I did read this with Alan again from the Library of Alexandria, who is a big history buff, really likes Parmenion, really likes Philip, and a bunch of the other characters that are in the novel. So it was very helpful to read this with Alan because he would tell me about these real people and some of the things that were done well in the book, not done well. But I will say that reading it with him has made me realize that if you are a big history buff and you know a lot about the history of this time period and the characters, there are a lot of changes that David Gemmell has made, and those changes are often skewed in Parmenion's favor. So if you don't like that, then it may hamper your enjoyment of this book. I still think that it was a really solid, heroic, historical fantasy, and I'm really looking forward to book 2. But your opinion may vary based on how much you know of this time period and how important those characters are to you. After that, this is where we dive into my romance selections for the month. And I will timestamp this just in case you don't care about romance, so you can kind of skip over it to the end. But I read, the first romance novel that I had read I picked it because it fit the prompts for the readathon. And then once I read it, I was like, oh, that was really refreshing. To read something like in a couple of hours and just breeze through, I want to do more. So then I ended up reading a couple in quick succession. But the very first one was a book that has had a lot of hype this year, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I believe this is one of the ones that's up for the Goodreads Choice Awards for favorite romance, and I really enjoyed it. I can see why it has a lot of hype. This is a sapphic romance, and we have our main character, Delilah, who is an artist that lives in New York City. She's struggling for money. She has kind of cut herself off from her family. Her dad passed away when she was young, and she was raised in a very quiet and cold home with her stepmother and her stepsister Astrid. And at the beginning of the novel, she is invited to be the photographer for Astrid's wedding. And with the amount of money that her stepmother is offering her, she has no choice but to return to her childhood home and photograph this wedding. So while she is there, she meets up with one of Astrid's best friends, who has been her best friend since high school, and with whom Delilah did have some interactions when she was a teenager. And there is kind of this new spark between them. And so there is this question of, should they jump into something? The best friend, whose name is Claire, lives in this small town. Delilah lives in the big city. Will a relationship work between the two of them? And it was a lot of fun. I really liked this. Delilah was a delightful character. I really enjoyed. She's one of my favorite leads of a romance novel that I have read in a really long time. And she really made this book for me. I think the writing was nice and clean. The story was good, but Delilah was phenomenal. So I really, really liked her. There is a lot of high emotion in this book that is not necessarily related to the relationship. So to me, it almost toes the line between romance and what you would probably call women's fiction. Even though I don't really like that label, I would just call it contemporary fiction. But there's a lot of internal exploration, a lot of focus on how the things that happen in childhood impact you as an adult. So while this still is romance focused enough that I do think it's properly categorized as romance, it does lean a little bit into that kind of contemporary fiction sphere. And that is why I ended up giving it a 3.5 over a higher rating, because when I'm reading romance, I just kind of want to go all in on the romance. I like when the characters are nuanced and when they're well explored and when they do have intricate backstories, but I want most of the focus to be on the romance. So that's the only criticism that I had for Delilah Green. After that, I ended up getting a ton of recommendations, as you do, from Amazon. When you purchase one book on the Kindle, they'll give you all of these recommendations for others. And I was like, you know what? I am still in the mood for a romance, so I will go ahead. I will pick another one. And I ended up picking one that was called Let Me Be Yours. And I gave this one a 3-star. This is an ABO romance, and if you are in the fandom / fanfiction community, I'm sure you know what an ABO romance is. If you are not, you probably don't want to know. You can look it up if you want to, but that's exactly the kind of book that I was in the mood for. And this was pretty good. I wanted like a nice steamy romance, and I did get that side of it. But the setup for this story is that you have the king of a country, and this is a female king. It's just that the title is king. It doesn't have anything to, like, it's not a gendered title in this kingdom. You can be a female or a male king. So you have a king of a country who is looking for a bride. And unfortunately, she has lost her partner. So she was in an arranged marriage situation with someone she was really in love with, and that person passed away. However, there's a lot of political pressure for her to get married, to stabilize the kingdom, etc., etc. And so her mom arranges a marriage with a young woman who's from a different part of the kingdom. There's a lot, I think it has something to do with like trade routes. There's a lot of benefit in, marrying this individual. And so the king she has decided that this is going to be a political marriage only. She does not want to fall in love. She does not want to betray the memory of her old partner. And this is what she kind of proposes to the new queen. And so the queen says, yes, no problem. She didn't really want to get married, but felt that she had to for her people. And so they start off in this very amicable agreement and become friends. And then that friendship starts to turn into something more. So it was definitely a sweet romance. There were some steamy scenes, which is what I was looking for. But overall, it didn't do anything outrageous or really unique. And I don't think that it will stay with me for a super long time. But I still enjoyed my time with it when I did read it. And then the last romance selection for me this past month, was Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. And this is actually part 2. This is the companion novel to Delilah Green Doesn't Care. And I was really excited because I really enjoyed Delilah Green and I really liked Astrid. So this focuses on her stepsister. And I won't give the setup because it kind of spoils a little bit about what happens in Delilah Green. So you should probably read that one before you know about Astrid Parker's story. But I will say that the difficulty I have with Delilah Green, in that there was equal weight kind of given to the issues, we'll say, of the plot and the romance, I found that hit even harder in Astrid because the two leads both had a lot of, I will say, like, emotionally charged backstory. Like, there was a lot of difficulty that they both had to deal with from their past. And so that made for a really complex story. And again, like, for people who are really interested in that intersection between contemporary fiction and romance, I think that you could really enjoy this. I really enjoyed Astrid's character. I liked the cameos from the characters that we had before. But it just, like, it made it feel really weighty and almost like you're a little bit depressed on behalf of the characters because they've both been through so much. And I really wanted like a lighthearted, steamy kind of romance. And that is not what I got. So unfortunately, that was my 2-star read for the month, but I am still glad that I picked it up. I will still read the other companion novel because there will be a third one that is, based on the other person in their friend group. But it's not one that I will have to like rush out and buy. I'll probably wait and pick it up from my library when it does come out. I'm not sure we can count the 8th selection as a novel, but this was a short story, and I wish I had my copy because I could show you how adorable it is. It's the short story that was released by Madeline Miller called Galatea, and it is based on the story of the sculptor who sculpted this statue of a beautiful woman that then came to life. I think he was bestowed a blessing. I don't know, it was by Aphrodite or one of the goddesses, and the statue comes to life. And in true Madeline Miller style, this takes place from the perspective of the woman who was a statue. And it is about about her life and what it means to be given a life that is just in service of like the desires of a man, and what it means to essentially be someone's property and to exist only for the gratification of that man. And it's a really good short story. I really enjoyed it. Her prose is still beautiful. Mostly what it did was make me sad that I don't have a new book by Madeline Miller to read because I would really love to read it. I gave it 4 stars, but obviously this is 4 stars, like 4 short story stars. It's only 30 pages, so it's not like I'm judging it based on the same as a novel. I'm comparing it to other short stories. But if you enjoy short stories, if you want to be complete in your Madeline Miller collection, I think that you should pick it up, and it is certainly worth reading. And then we come to my very last book, which was the last volume in Scumvillain's Self-Saving System by MXTX. So this was actually kind of an afterword to her main series. This is a series that I read earlier this year. It was 3 volumes long, and this was a collection of extras or short stories that take place. Most of them take place after the main story, but some of them take place like during pockets of time that were skipped in the main story, or provide some backstory for some of the characters that we meet in that world. And it was really fun. I was really sad when I was finished because this is, even though I have finished 2 of her series, this is the first one that has been released in its completion in the English translation. And it was sad to say goodbye to the characters. I really ended up enjoying this story. It will certainly not be for everyone. It is very over the top. There is a lot of explicit content, both in terms of like violence and sexual content. But if you like it, like if you like those things, if you like, cultivation style magic, if you like romance, if you like where those two intersect, this series was hilarious. I really enjoyed reading it. It pokes a lot of fun at this kind of style of web novel in general. So I'm not very well read, and I did pick up on some of the jokes, but I'm sure that it probably hits even harder for people who have been reading things like this for a long time. But it was just delightful. Had a great time. I got a special edition of this final one, which came with like a bunch of like bookmarks and stickers and stuff, which was really fun. And I'm just really glad that I decided to pick up this author. I'm glad that her works have been translated into English, and hopefully this will pave the road for lots of other translated works to make their way into the hands of new readers and new fans. But that's it. That is my reading wrap up for November. I have a lot of things that I'm really excited to read in December at the end of the year, and I would love to hear how your November went. What were your favorite books that you read? What are you really looking forward to reading next month? And I will see you with another video soon. Bye!